welcome back to the Lone Conservative. Now, before we get started today, I know I didn't produce an episode Friday. I had something planned with Orty's School of Coding. I don't know what he likes to be called on Twitter. It changes like every dang day. Uh, but he's really smart. He's from KLRN, and we were going to talk on Friday, and just some last-minute college Republican business came up that I had to deal with like ASAP. So if there's ever an episode that gets canceled like that again, just know it's because of last-minute business. It's stuff that happened that's out of my control. Otherwise, I would love making content for you beautiful people. And speaking of making content, today we have on Taylor Giles. He is a lone conservative contributor and noted Eagle Scout, which, I mean, Taylor's a nerd. But Taylor, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric.
So before, I wanted to talk about the Second Amendment with you today because that's an issue that you're really passionate about. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about first, before all that, I know it's kind of off topic. We didn't really discuss it before the podcast. It literally just came to my mind. I know there's been some controversy with the Boy Scouts lately, and wasn't it they're just like now a policy in the Boy Scouts where they have to admit girls? I kind of, coming from someone who is an Eagle Scout, I do, and I think that's a very reputable and goal to meet, and I think it's very prestigious, despite what some of the bashing we've seen from the left on Boy Scouts. So, being someone who's so involved with the organization, I kind of wanted to know your thoughts about this recent integration with Boy Scouts and all the backlash they've been receiving from the left for so many years.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've seen a progression towards more inclusiveness in the Boy Scouts of America. And this isn't the first actual policy that has gone into place talking about bringing more people into the program. So right now, basically, it's just an ability to bring more people into the program. It's not actually co-ed, so there aren't going to be boys and girls in the same troop or anything like that going out on campouts together. There's going to be separate troops of boys and then separate troops of girls that are doing things completely separately. They can still meet in the same places as long as they're separated, and they can still have the same chartered organization, which is basically the organization. Essentially, in layman's terms, it's the organization that provides a meeting place for the troops. So it's basically, like I said, again, it's basically a measure to open the program up to more people. And it's going to be interesting how it works. It'll be really interesting. There's some things that are going to be a little bit of a change, but it's something that I think a lot of people are looking forward to.
Well, see how a lot of people described it. I thought it was, so obviously that's my misconception. Everyone was kind of describing it like it was going to be co-ed troops, and like girls and boys were going to be bunking together, and girls and boys were going to be in extremely close proximity together. And that seemed to be the main argument between the left and the right when they talked about getting girls integrated into Boy Scouts. So, I mean, it's kind of, it seems like the debate was meaningless.
Right. It's interesting to me because I was definitely on the inside with it. And a lot of the accusatory statements kind of from the right didn't really make a whole lot of sense because people were saying, oh, this is the end of the Boy Scouts, this, that, and the other. But the interesting thing too is that a lot of people don't realize is that the Boy Scouts of America, the parent company, already had programs that allowed females to be active in the Boy Scouts. So Venturing in particular is one program within the Boy Scouts of America that allowed females from the age of like 14 to 20 or so to participate in the Boy Scouts of America's programs and do a lot of the same things that the Boy Scouts, which is another program within the Boy Scouts of America, can do themselves. So, and that program is 20 years old. And then there's also another program called Sea Scouts that allow females to be active. And then there's other things, or other programs as well that allow females. So it's not anything really all that new. It's just something that a lot of people don't necessarily agree with because they see the Boy Scouts, something that's been around for 100 plus years, 106 years now, that is allowing girls into the program. But it's not that simple. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and that's like I said, that's how the debate kind of made it sound. So it seems like it was very deceptive from both sides, especially from the right kind of freaking out, like you said, about the end of the Boy Scouts. The last question I kind of wanted to ask you on this before we get into a conversation about gun control and bump stocks and all that juicy stuff is it was a joke at the beginning of the podcast. I think being an Eagle Scout is something that anyone should be very proud of. But like when I said, oh, Taylor's a nerd, he's an Eagle Scout, it seems as if there's a lot. Like I had a cousin, for example, who was in Eagle Scouts, or not Eagle Scouts, but in Boy Scouts, and he was like bullied relentlessly for being a Boy Scout. Every single member of family that I've had who's ever been a Boy Scout got bullied for being a Boy Scout. One of the reasons why I didn't want to be a Boy Scout was because I didn't want to get bullied for being a Boy Scout. It seems as if there's kind of this, and this has nothing to do with politics. This is kind of like my own curiosity on the subject. It seems as if there's some, at least in some areas, this misconception about Boy Scouts that it's lame or that dweebs are in Boy Scouts or I mean, where does that come from? Because when I've read about Boy Scouts, like now from what I've read about what they do, especially at the young age that they're at, it seems like a really, really, really cool club and something that really helps develop good values. And I don't understand why it seems as if it's got this kind of hostility from kids toward it from some factions.
Yeah, it's really funny. I kind of laugh at it now, but growing up, I mean, there was a lot of that, and you know, you kind of try to go under the radar when people see that you're a Boy Scout or whatever, which is totally cool. But you know, the further up I got in the Boy Scouts of America, and the further up I got in the program, and when I was actually able to tell people my story and about what I get to do, you know, they were just amazed, and a lot of the criticism went from criticizing the program to jealousy because I went, you know, from being a nobody from Southern West Virginia that's never really been that big on the national stage to representing 50,000 people across 17 states, and you know, getting to speak on stage right after President Trump and getting to meet some really high level CEOs and getting to work with them and getting to meet members of Congress as well. So the opportunities that the Boy Scouts of America provide for its members are just second to none. I mean, there's no other youth organization out there that I've seen, anyways, that have so many great opportunities for the youth of America to really gain real life experiences and to get so many great opportunities, like meeting the president and like meeting other business leaders that the Boy Scouts of America has.
Yeah, and it's I don't know. I wish I'd gone into Boy Scouts. That would be I regret it. That's like one of my biggest regrets from childhood is I wish I'd not been peer pressured into kind of staying out of it. But moving on from Boy Scouts, I'm sorry. Some of that was just I forgot until literally we just started talking. I'm like, oh wait a minute, he's a Boy Scout. So I had a few questions about that whole thing, a few that I've really always wanted answered, and I actually don't know many Boy Scouts that are as high up as you are. So I'm kind of glad I got my questions answered. But the main reason I had you on today was to talk about gun control. You've written some articles for Lone Conservative. There was a bump stock ban that went into effect 6 days ago. Before we start talking about the really deep issues like concealed carry and what the Second Amendment means and why it's here and why we should take it more importantly, what do you think, or more seriously, I should say, what do you think about this bump stock ban that's gone into effect?
You know, I think it's really ridiculous, and I've been kind of disappointed at President Trump for pushing for this. I mean, as someone that's been fairly active within the gun community and someone that talks to a lot of people within the gun community, bump stocks are ridiculous. You know, there's no use for them. They're just kind of like a fun novelty to have. There's no practical use for them. They don't improve your accuracy. They just improve your rate of fire, which even if you have an aftermarket trigger and you know how to use it, it doesn't really improve your rate of fire all that much versus a quality aftermarket trigger. And you know, it's it's just another opportunity for the left to undermine the Second Amendment, because what a lot of people don't realize is that these bump stocks, unlike firearms, they have no serial number. There's no way to track them. They're basically the same thing as, you know, a 30 round magazine. They're an accessory to a firearm, so there's no way to actually track them, and that's the scary part because you know, in the official text of the ban, it classifies them as a machine gun, which is something that has an individual serial number that is unique to every firearm, it has those things, but bump stocks don't. They and it's really kind of leading the way to banning other firearm accessories like like a 30 round magazine that's standard for AR-15s, and those type of things. That's really scary for the gun community.
Yeah. Well, so to play devil's advocate here, what I've heard from a lot of gun control advocates is that, oh, well, maybe bump stocks don't increase accuracy; they just increase rate of fire. But it's not like you need to be extremely accurate if you're going to go into a crowd of people and try and kill as many of them as you can. You just have to be as fast as you can, which people argue that bump stocks help improve. So how do exactly? And I honestly think that's probably one of their strongest arguments. So how do you respond exactly to that argument when people say it's not about being accurate? It's just if you go to a crowd of people, you're more able to mow them down than if you didn't have a bump stock.
That is a tough one, because there's a lot of merit to that argument. But one of the things that I actually forgot to mention is that I've actually used bump stocks before, and they're really difficult and really finicky to use. So the reliability of them is just kind of out the door, especially if you get the wrong one. A lot of them are tailored specifically to a certain setup of a firearm, and if you don't have that specific setup for a firearm in relation to that bump stock, then it really doesn't work very well. So, these people that say that these bump stocks are, really advantaging or really making it unfair. Well, yes, they do have the capability in the right hands to do a lot of damage. The idea that they're going to do a lot of damage in the hands of a bunch of different people is kind of ridiculous. And really, Las Vegas is really the only time that I know of, anyways, that bump stocks have been used in a mass shooting. So the idea that we need to ban bump stocks because they were used in Las Vegas, that's a bad precedent, because if we were to ban every single firearm or firearm accessory that was used in any mass shooting whatsoever, there wouldn't be any firearms at all.
Yeah. Well, speaking of mass shootings, actually, and I think that's really all I wanted to ask about bump stocks. It's it's an issue that I'm not nearly educated enough on to talk about a lot. I think I'm above average in terms of gun knowledge, but there are some issues that I just try to stay out of unless I really can research it and bulk up on knowledge and stuff because it's just there's mechanics of guns that you need to know to properly argue for or against bump stocks. And I don't feel I have an intricate enough knowledge of specific firearms to say, oh, I'm for or against this bump stock ban. And the reason also why I'm extremely conflicted is it seems like not just the Trumpists who go with everything that Trump does, but it seems as if a lot of people on the right are pretty conflicted on this. You've had people like, and unless I'm wrong and he's recently come out against it, but I distinctly remember on his podcast, you have people like Ben Shapiro who have come out and said that it's understandable why you not just that it's a stupid ban, but it's understandable why someone would want to ban bump stocks. And then you have other right wing figures coming out and saying this is ridiculous, this is stupid. Dana Lash, I believe, has been, unless again I may be wrong, because this is kind of an off the cuff conversation that we're having, but I believe there's been Dana Lash and some other people have come out and said this is ridiculous. Banning bump stocks isn't going to change anything. So I just don't know enough about the issue to really talk in depth about it. But when you talk about mass shootings, one of the things that I have argued a lot about, and I've debated a lot about, and I've had conversations about, and it's something that always gets brought up when you talk about universal background checks and when you discuss common sense, quote unquote, gun reform, is a national gun registry. And I kind of wanted to know. I think it's a very bad idea. I think it would be impossible to implement. But I wanted to know what your thoughts on this idea of a national gun registry would be.
Yeah, I mean, a national gun registry is just, I mean, it's kind of laughable because you have so many different people. I mean, you literally have more firearms than you do people in the United States. I mean, there's over 15 million AR-15s in private hands. There's, millions and millions and millions of hunting rifles. There's all kinds of firearms that are just in private hands that trade ownership, very easily with state laws, especially that allow for private sales of firearms. And that's the beauty of America, and that's the beauty of having freedom. And with a national gun registry, that brings the idea of Big Brother into play, the idea that Big Brother knows where you are, Big Brother knows what you have, and that's just not appealing for a lot of people, especially people in the conservative movement that are very anti big government and very anti regulation. So it's just another governmental overreach, or it's just another idea of governmental overreach that is just would not work. One, and two, would make a lot of people really, really mad.
Well, beyond not work. So basically, when people could talk about a universal background check, that's why I brought this up. When people talk about a universal background check or a UBI, basically, when people refer to universal background checks, for those of you who don't know, there's background checks when you have to go through a federally licensed seller of firearms. But in many states, when you go to a private seller of firearms, private sellers, I believe, are usually identified as someone who sells like less than 11 firearms a year. That's probably not an exact number, but it's around there. Um, you don't usually have to go through some sort of background check. And the argument is that it should be a federal requirement that every single transaction of firearms, whether it be I'm gifting you a gun for Christmas, whether it be I'm buying a gun for you on Craigslist, or whatever, have to go through some sort of federally administered background check. And when we talk about UBIs, the only way that that can be effective is if you know where that gun is going to be at every single moment of every single day. The only way you're going to be able to do that is with a registry. And when you start bringing up registries to people after this, you discuss common sense gun reform like UBIs, they or UBCs, I should say. I don't know why I'm saying UBI. People get extremely uncomfortable because national gun registries are extremely prone to abuse by tyrannies. It's not even funny. If you look about in the modern age of guns, if you look at about every single tyranny throughout history, whether it be communistic, fascistic, I don't care. Just about every single one of them have implemented, when you are allowed firearms, for the very few people that are, just about every single one of them have implemented some form of gun registry. I don't like the fact that the government can keep track of who exactly has what, when, and where. It's something that makes me extremely uncomfortable. And I just, like I said, when you talk about common sense gun reform and you're talking about universal background checks and people are all for it, when you bring up exactly what needs to happen in order for that to be semi-effective, a lot of people start backing out. So I think the term common sense gun reform is extremely deceptive.
I completely agree. And a lot of the misconception with these universal background checks is that there's guns being sold on every street corner in America that don't require a background check, and that's simply not true. And the other thing too that a lot of people like to throw out, or a lot of the opponents to firearms and the Second Amendment like to throw out, is the what they call the gun show loophole, which I don't. Almost none of them have been to a gun show, because I can tell you for a fact that almost every dealer at a gun show is a licensed FFL. So if you're a licensed FFL, that means you have to run a background check on anybody you sell a firearm to. So there are very few people out there that actually go to gun shows that set up that are not registered through the ATF, and don't require a background check whenever a customer purchases a firearm. So the idea that the street corners are going to be full of people selling firearms and this, that, and the other right now, anyways, is just ridiculous. And it's one of those things where we go back to it all the time, especially in the Second Amendment community, where that's still going to happen after if a universal background check law is going to be passed. So even if it was passed today, there would still be firearms sold illegally on the streets. There's just no good way to stop that. The only thing it's stopping are our law-abiding citizens from exercising their right to bear arms.
Well, a lot of also when you discuss the gun show loophole, and I may be wrong about it. It's honestly been a really this conversation is reminding me how long it's been since I've actually talked deeply about the Second Amendment and all the issues that come with it. But when you discuss the gun show loophole, and I may be wrong here, if I'm wrong, someone pointed out, I'll correct myself. I say that every time when I'm a little unsure. But when you discuss the gun show loophole, one of the most popular arguments is that the reason there's so much crime in Chicago isn't because of Illinois' strict gun laws. It's because people are driving down to Indiana, buying a ton of guns from gun shows and private sellers in Indiana, and are driving back up to Illinois, where now they sell these guns illegally to people, to gangsters and stuff. There's a few issues with this. One, what this is often known as when people will let's say a gangster comes to me and they say, "Hey Eric, you have a clean background. Go buy this gun for me from this federally licensed seller." It's called a straw purchase. And no matter what state you do that in, it's a straw purchase. So if I go down to Indiana to buy a bunch of guns for other people in Illinois, that's still a straw purchase. You're not allowed to do that. That's illegal. If you are a gangster, let's say driving down to Indiana, and you're not allowed to legally buy in Illinois, but you're buying in Indiana because they don't do these private background checks, that's still illegal. You're not allowed to just shirk the laws from Illinois because you're in Indiana buying a gun in Indiana. There's actually I forget the exact federal code, but there's actually a federal code that basically says when you are buying from someone in a separate state, and this applies in online purchases, this applies for in-person purchases. But there's a U.S. code that basically says if you are from X state and you're trying to buy a gun from state Y, you have to undergo a background check. And I believe that applies to private purchases, that applies to internet purchases, that applies to almost everything. If you're not buying within your own state, you got to go through some sort of background check. So there's a lot of misconceptions about what exactly people can do by going to other states and kind of exploiting quote unquote loopholes in the law, but it's just not true. And there's actually been studies that show that most of the guns that have been used in crimes in Chicago and in other high crime areas don't really come from gun shows. A majority of them don't come from gun shows, a vast majority from what I remember. So when people say the gun show loophole, when people say they try to say that one little loophole in the law is the cause of this massive gun wave, this massive crime wave. It seems to me that it's this human error, this human condition where we like to pose simple solutions to complex problems.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because I, talking to other people, talking to opponents of firearms and the Second Amendment, I always ask them, well, when was the last time you bought a firearm? And a lot of them don't understand the process that it takes to actually purchase a firearm. So whenever you go to a dealer or something like that, there are red flags that they look for when they're selling a firearm. And same goes with private sales. The vast majority of people that are actually selling privately, if they don't require you to go to an FFL and to go through a background check, they will check you out and make sure that you're not going to do anything ridiculous. But if you go through a dealer and you're purchasing a firearm during the process, a dealer has the ability to do a dealer deny at any point in the process. So that means that, if you say something that you shouldn't say if you're trying to purchase a firearm, and the dealer doesn't, or the dealer or the employee at the gun store doesn't like, then they can actually tell you that you are not allowed to buy that firearm today, and not allow you to buy that firearm. And that's across the board, and that's kind of a responsibility that firearm stores have, is to, regardless of how much money they're going to make off of a firearm sale, if someone says something that is a little that's not right, or that doesn't seem right, they have the ability, and they kind of have the duty to not sell that person the firearm.
Yeah. And after this podcast, I am going to try and find that U.S. code, because I remember I debated. I have like so much information in my head that it always gets. It's like it gets clogged up there. But I remember I debated the college Democrats at UNCW over gun control, and they're like I said, I'm gonna have to look up this U.S. code. I'm definitely gonna read it off on the next episode of the podcast, because it kind of, obviously there's still room for abuse, just like there is in any legal system, but there is basically a law that demolished on the books right now federally that kind of demolishes this idea that there is a gun show loophole. But when we talk about guns, it goes past kind of gun show loopholes, and it goes past kind of people trying to pose simple solutions to complex problems. And there are some complex issues that I feel a lot of people are either for or against just because they're either pro or anti Second Amendment. But I feel like when it comes to, like, for example, concealed carry, I feel that a lot of people on the left and the right, from my experiences and talking with them, and I'm not even the most educated on it seems as if a lot of people don't fully understand what concealed carry is. They don't fully understand how to defend or attack it. They're just, like I said, they're against it because they're solidified in this anti or pro Second Amendment stance. So, to me, also, because I know you know more about it than I do, to me, someone who does not know the most about concealed carry laws and what the implications of concealed carry are, can you kind of explain what your position on concealed carry is across the country and why exactly that is?
Definitely. So, one of the hard things about explaining concealed carry laws to people is that it's different in every single state. So that's one challenge of talking about concealed carry laws. But I personally think that it's a great idea. You know, you've seen all across the nation where there have been instances where a law-abiding gun owner stops a criminal. There was an instance in Chicago, I believe, and I don't have the facts right in front of me or anything, but a woman was being assaulted by a man at a bus stop, and she was a valid concealed carry permit holder, and she deterred him from potentially killing her. And there's been other instances like down in Texas where there was a shooting at a church, unfortunately, and the gunman was taken down by a law-abiding citizen with a firearm. So the idea that that concealed carry doesn't work, or that no concealed carry permit holder has ever stopped a mass shooting or something like that, is just a narrative that the left tries to push to undermine the concealed carry, because frankly, not only does it protect the person that is carrying, it also protects the people that are around them. And the vast majority, every person that I've met that has gone through a concealed carry class or something of the of that sort, or someone that carries for their protection, also carries for the protection of the people around them. So it's not anything people that carry or people that say that people that carry to threaten others or to make themselves look cool or something like that are just completely wrong. At least in my personal experiences, that is a completely untrue statement that um, unfairly categorizes the people that like to and feel the need to carry a firearm on a daily basis.
Mm. Well, so I know there's also, when it comes to concealed carry, what I do know is that there's been a lot of issues with kind of interstate carrying of guns or of firearms. I know there was this one woman, I believe it was in New Jersey, who she was facing years of prison time because it was something like she was driving home from work and she got lost and she ended up across the New Jersey border, got pulled over, and got arrested for having a firearm illegally because her basically concealed carry license from, I forget which state she was originally from, but her concealed carry license from X state didn't apply in New Jersey. And I know there's been some movements for, like, let's say you get a concealed carry license in North Carolina, where I'm from, or in West Virginia, where you're from. I know there's been pushes at the federal level to be like, let's make this so, and pushes in various states to make it so, like, let's make it apply everywhere. Reciprocity, I believe, is the term that is used. What do you think about that whole issue where if, like, I have a concealed carry permit in North Carolina, it would also apply in California?
I think it's a great idea because this legal entrapment that really binds the hands of these law-abiding citizens that want to carry are only hurting these law-abiding citizens that want to carry. I mean, there's countless instances in border towns and in border areas with other states, anyways, where someone inadvertently crosses a state line and gets pulled over or you know get stopped by the police for some odd reason, whether it's speeding or whatnot, and they end up facing years and a felony charge and a conviction that they otherwise would have never have gotten, and their criminal record's totally clean. And it's just an unfortunate situation for everyone involved because these gun laws are just they vary so much from state to state, and whenever you carry into a different state, you have to know those gun laws to a T, that it makes it really tough for law-abiding citizens to follow the law. For instance, in West Virginia, these so-called gun-free zones aren't really gun-free, and they don't hold the full force and effect of law. So if you go into a store or a privately owned business that has a sign on the door that says no firearms permitted, that actually doesn't hold the full force and effect of law. The only way that you can be apprehended or punished legally for carrying in those areas is that if you are asked to leave and you do not leave, that would be a misdemeanor trespassing charge. But in Ohio, which is just across the river from West Virginia, if you carry into a store that has that same placard in it, then you can be that placard holds the full force and effect of law. So essentially, if you go in there and they find out that you're carrying, then you can be apprehended by the police without ever being warned by the owner or by an employee of the business. So the 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 new law that a lot of people are pushing for in Congress is going to make concealed carrying across state lines so much easier and so much better for the law-abiding citizens. Because a lot of people say it in the gun community, and I truly believe it, that laws only restrict law-abiding citizens. They don't restrict criminals. Like I tell people all the time in West Virginia, a misdemeanor trespassing charge isn't going to stop someone that is facing life in prison if they go and shoot someone. So these gun laws are really truly only limiting the law-abiding citizens.
Yeah, and one of the things. So I remember when I had my gun debate at UNCW, and this is kind of the interesting thing about this whole thing. When I had my gun debate at UNCW, we talked a lot about federalism, and this applied when we were discussing like a universal background check, but it also applies when we're discussing concealed carry laws. So I know there's been some, and this is not as often what's talked about, but it does seem there's been some push from the right to implement concealed carry laws at a federal level. Like we let's I don't know exactly how it would go into place, but it would be a federal commitment that if you have a concealed carry permit in, like, again, North Carolina, then it would have to apply by in California. And instead of California having to pass its own individual state law to have reciprocity with North Carolina, instead it would just be a federal enforcement. And what I hear from some people on the left, ironically, is that they're arguing for federalism. They're saying, well, why should the federal government be able to force California to accept a North Carolina concealed carry license? So, and again, I know this isn't as popular a position on the right, but I've seen it kind of start to grow as people are just getting more and more frustrated that they can have their gun in their pocket, or not in their pocket, but in their holster as they drive through Indiana, and then when they get to Illinois, they have to put their gun in their trunk, or they have to find some way to make some inconvenient way to make the way they carry their gun apply or comply with Illinois law that is extremely restrictive on the subject. So what do you think? Should we, as the right, should we push for this concealed carry reciprocity to be enforced at a federal level, or should we push for each individual state to be to essentially say, okay, fine, if you have a concealed carry license in X, then you can have it here?
I mean, I was actually just thinking about this today. This is the one time that I think I would ever argue for federalism, because, like, we've left it up to the states for this long, and you can see how messed up the gun laws are in this country. For instance, in West Virginia, as a concealed carry permit holder, you only have reciprocity with 36, I believe it's 36 or 38 other states. And that literally changes on a daily basis. So leaving it up to the states clearly hasn't worked in the past. So really, the only way to have some sort of standard across the nation is for the federal government to take it over, which is most definitely not a popular stance by the right, but it would solidify the Second Amendment, and it would make it much easier for law-abiding citizens to exercise their rights.
Mm-hmm. I I'm conflicted on the issue because I tend to, I don't know. I tend to agree with the fact that if you, like, again, if you're from North Carolina, you drive up to Illinois, I tend to agree with the fact that you shouldn't just be arrested in Illinois, especially when you went through, because the North Carolina process, and the process, honestly, in most, like, everyone acts like the people who don't know concealed carry. And like I said, I'm not the most experienced person on it, but I know enough to know that pretty much every single state that offers concealed carry, the process to get that sort of license, or the process to get that sort of I'll say privilege in this case, since it's not an enumerated right yet. Um, the process to get this privilege is rigorous. It's very rigorous, and it's very time consuming. So I tend to lean toward the fact that no, I don't think you should be arrested in Illinois because you got a concealed carry permit in North Carolina, you have your gun concealed, then you drive up to Illinois, and all of a sudden the authorities find you with it, and they arrest you like they would any other gun trafficker. They arrest you like any other person who's illegally toting a firearm. But at the same time, I am skeptical, even if they're liberal states, even if I think their laws, their state laws, as of right now, are unconstitutional. I think that's a case for individual court cases where you challenge these states and you take them to court. I'm skeptical of allowing the federal government to undermine our state of federalism because even if you give it to them in a good context, I'm afraid that then eventually they'll use that as precedent to use it in a not so good context where they try to violate a state's ability to a state's rights to choose their own destiny in their laws because they don't like that destiny. And in any other circumstance, that state would be totally allowed to do that. But now, because the federal government has this weird precedent that somehow the right allowed, they start using it to suppress states' rights. I hate using the slippery slope argument because I think usually when people use the slippery slope argument, they are very wrong. Like, for example, there were people on the traditional right who were saying if you allow gay marriage to be legal, then the horses are going to. I mean, this is an extreme example, and it's kind of a straw man, but it makes the point that you'll have horses eating each other and society is going to fall apart and blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, I think it's been proven throughout history that the slippery slope with government trending toward tyranny is a real one. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this issue.
It's definitely an interesting one, and I totally agree. It's something that the conservative movement is torn about. But if you look at like the other rights that are enumerated in the Bill of Rights, they've all been essentially put. I mean, granted, through states. I mean, most states have some sort of or all states have some sort of a Second Amendment or a right to bear arms in their constitution, and they've adopted all of the Bill of Rights. But the thing that you see across the nation is that the Bill of Rights has been basically required to be implemented by the states from the federal government. So the idea that it's shouldn't be federalized, that it gives too much power to the federal government, I can see that. But at the same time, in the past and with history, and with the other amendments, it's something that isn't often that doesn't often happen, but it has happened before in the past. So then it kind of goes into what restrictions on the Second Amendment are actually constitutional and which ones aren't. So it's a little bit of a different argument at that point.
So actually, speaking of what restrictions are constitutional in the Second Amendment and which ones aren't, there are. I want to know what you think because I see a lot of arguments from the libertarian side of the aisle that the ban on fully automatic weapons is an unconstitutional one, and that people should be allowed. We can determine the restrictions is usually what they say, but people should be allowed to hold fully automatic weapons more freely than they are now. What do you think of that? Because I'm glad I have you on this podcast because you are very knowledgeable on this subject. I'm semi-knowledgeable, like I said, above average, but I'm nowhere. I'm not an expert or anything like that. I don't. When people make these arguments, like I said, I'm conflicted. I'm because I genuinely don't think that fully automatic firearms should be made widely accessible. But but at the same time, when the libertarian, because I don't know, a lot of libertarians, even though some of them are crazy, they can argue very well. When people argue for this specific thing, I don't really know. I don't really have many arguments against it. I'm just kind of like, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. And I don't want to disagree with something just because I've been taught my whole life it's taboo. I want to disagree with it because I know it's genuinely the wrong thing to do. So, what do you think when you hear? I mean, if you ever hear people say, "Well, I think fully automatic weapons should be more accessible to the general public."
I think it's an interesting topic. And I don't necessarily have a strong opinion, a really strong entrenched opinion one way or the other. I would say that I lean more towards, deregulating fully automatic firearms to the point where there is more of a higher bar set to actually obtain one, but one that is less than what we have now. So right now it is very difficult to own one. You have to go through basically you have to get a tax stamp through the ATF, which is $200, and that is for a fully automatic firearm to begin with. And that fully automatic firearm must have been manufactured before, I believe it's 1986, and they generally run well over $20,000 on the market, and they can only be bought by these certain people that have been approved by ATF and that actually have the money. Then if they have a silencer on it, or if it's a short barreled rifle, then they have to have other tax stamps as well, and have to go through that process. And a tax stamp, for those of you that don't know, usually takes anywhere from six months to a year to actually obtain through the ATF. So it's not something that they take lightly. But I definitely think that it should be a little easier to obtain one, because, like I said, right now, you have to. It's a really truly a big brother scenario where if you do have a firearm that has a tax stamp, you have to let the ATF know where you're taking it. If you take it out of state, you have to let the ATF know where you store it. You have to let the ATF know all these different things about you, and they are allowed to track you and all these different things that make it really unappealing to have a fully automatic firearm.
Mm-hmm.
And while, don't get me wrong, there's no practical, there's no practical, like, uh, thing to use them for. It's something that the government shouldn't be able to limit. And it's something that, I personally believe is an overstep of the government. And, it's one of the reasons why the Second Amendment is in place. So the government can't regulate the sale and the transfer of firearms throughout the country. So that's sort of my stance on it, anyways.
I agree that it should that, and that's the only reason, because there are some people on the left who will be like, "Oh, you just want to legislate all fully automatic firearms. You want to deregulate that whole field." And it's like, I say yes in the heat of the debate, but and I like I said, inside, and when people ask me, I lean toward, yeah, let's regulate them to the extreme. But I am not someone. I feel like a lot of people in our society are comfortable with being against something because it's considered taboo, and that breeds intellectual weakness. So you know what, I don't want to be against this deregulation of fully automatic firearms simply for the fact that I consider it to be taboo, and because I've always been taught it's taboo. I want to have legitimate reasons to be against it, which is why I've had this internal struggle with the issue for a little while. While I do think they should be regulated more, I would agree with your deregulation tactics, where you don't have to inform the ATF where you are with it every moment of every day, whenever you take it out of state. Like, if you want to, I keep using this example because I consider you a friend, Taylor. If I'm in North Carolina and you're in West Virginia and you want to come down to North Carolina to show me your new machine gun, we'll take it to the range and let's have some fun with it. I don't necessarily think that you should have to inform the ATF of your entire journey uh, to show me something cool if you're coming down to North Carolina to visit anyway. So it's just, I don't know. I'm split on the issue. I don't usually say I don't know on this podcast very often because I'm always right, but I don't know.
It's, yeah, it's something that is not a popular view. And actually, a lot of in the gun world in itself, it's not super well known, but there is sort of a conversation on how available like militarized firearms and militarized accessories should be to the general public. And most of the people that are really hardcore Second Amendment are all for it. And I personally am all for it too, because if you look at history, if you look at back in the in the days of the Revolution and that type of thing, these private citizens had exactly the same things that the government had. The you could go even as far to say that the government, and definitely in America's in America's situation, that the federal government was outgunned by the individual citizens. And I don't necessarily know, that's a little bit of an extreme. And frankly, the idea that people are going to be rolling around the streets through small town USA with a big M1A1 Abrams is a little bit ridiculous. But having the ability to buy body armor and having the ability to buy night vision technology and that type of thing should be you know should be outlined in the Second Amendment. And for the most part, it definitely is, and you are allowed to buy those. But it is a little bit of a taboo in the gun industry on whether you actually allow people to buy body armor and whether you actually allow people to buy night vision and more militarized accessories than what are commonly seen out in everyday America.
I would love night vision goggles. That'd be so cool. But no, I agree with you. And the biggest argument that I always use against people, there's listen, there's too many people on the left who don't give the founding fathers enough credit. There's many people on the right. It's mainly a left wing thing, but there's some people on the right who don't give the founding fathers enough credit. In their own time, they saw advancement with firearms that we don't often consider. If they wanted people to only be able, now I think eventually, with what we have today, with drones and nukes and and napalm, they'd come to some sort of bit like, okay, maybe we shouldn't allow citizens to have those. But if the founding fathers only meant for citizens to have muskets, they would have directly and explicitly said in the Constitution, this is limited to muskets, or this is limited to X amount of firearms. They wouldn't say that we have generally a right to keep and bear arms, because the founding fathers understood more than most people at that time the ability for the human race to progress technologically in all fields. They saw it themselves. They would have, like I said, they would have directly said, you are limited to X gun, but it's your right to have X gun. They would have said muskets. So when people say like, oh, this was only written in a time of muskets, this was only they really just meant the people to bear muskets. There were far more guns available at the time than the common musket. Guns that the founding fathers believed that people should have access to. The puckle gun is, I think, one of the best examples the right has to offer, where people were able under federal law at that time to buy that sort of weapon, which had a much greater capacity than the regular musket. So it's I don't understand why people can't understand. Like listen, you can disagree with the Second Amendment all you want. I'll intensely disagree with you, but if you disagree with the premise of the Second Amendment, that's fine. But people who annoy me are people that try to bring the Second Amendment into their own standards. They say, well, I think the Second Amendment should exist, but it only applies to muskets. No, no. Just say you disagree with the premise of the Second Amendment. Don't try to make the Second Amendment something it's not. Because it's obvious that you don't like the Second Amendment more so than you think that the Second Amendment is being misapplied.
Right, I totally agree. You don't see people like for right now. I mean, the idea that it limits technology just to muskets is ridiculous. I mean, if we're going on that premise, we would be all still writing with on parchment and quill. It's just ridiculous, and it's a way for the left to undermine the Second Amendment, and it's a way to regulate what people have, so that way, they're not powerful. And that's the whole that it completely takes away the premise of the Second Amendment, like you said.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know. I genuinely believe there's going to come. I think there's so much misinformation out there. I genuinely believe, and I'm not a catastrophist by any stretch of the imagination, but I am more of a cynic. I do genuinely believe that there's going to come to a point, if the right can't get off its butt and start really going out there and properly educating people on the Second Amendment and on firearms, there is going to be a point where we get to New Zealand, to where we have a mass shooting, a terrible tragedy, and all of a sudden, one of these days, there's enough radicals in Congress where a split-second emotional response can finally be made and can stick. And that is something that genuinely frightens me. And I don't think it's going to happen if Donald Trump loses the next election. I don't think it's going to happen even in the next 10 to 20 years. But eventually, I think people don't understand that it could get to that point. And this isn't just because of the radical left. It's we need to do a better job educating people.
I agree, and one of the things that I tell people all the time is that I am I am not, like don't get me wrong whatsoever. I think we do have a mass shooting problem. I think that the mass shootings that happen across the world are just absolutely ridiculous, and it's something that we haven't seen, in history before, and it's just a real shame that we have to deal with this, you know, almost on a daily basis. And but the idea at the same time, the idea that this problem can be legislated away is very ignorant to the legislative process and very ignorant to how laws actually work. Because if that were the case, if we were allowed to create some sort of this overall great law, and that would just sweep away the issue, it would just it just the idea just doesn't work, because people would still break that law. It's the same reason why, while yes, murder is illegal, but we still have people murdering people every single day. The idea that we've created murder to be illegal doesn't has never stopped criminals before. I mean, obviously it has, to an extent. Like, there's going to be a lot of people that aren't going to go out and kill somebody now that it's illegal. But there's still killings that happen. It's not something that we can just legislate away. It's something that is at the core of of not just American culture, but it's a problem with cultures across the world, and it sees no boundaries really. And you see that not only because it was evident, or not only because of mass shootings in New Zealand, but because of mass shootings in America and all over. And it's something that we have to educate people about, because this is a huge problem that we need to fix. And legislating it away is not the answer. And the idea that legislation and government can fix every single worldly issue is, in my opinion, ignorant to the entire premise of government.
It can be said simply that you just can't legislate away evil. And I remember saying this in my gun debate. You can't. The issue with murder too is the right brings up, and you brought it up too, and I think it's a good point, but it's often turned around, is that we have laws against murder and people still murder people. And the left will often respond, it's like, well, we still have laws against it. Why don't we have laws against gun ownership? Well, the issue is murder isn't a crime. Natural rights philosophy essentially acknowledges that there are going to be, it's why we have a government in the first place. It's why we don't just stay in a state of nature. Natural rights philosophy understands that there are going to be bad actors out there who are always going to try and abuse their natural rights and use them maliciously and use them in ways that they weren't supposed to be used. People are going to try and abuse their right to self-defense to get weapons that are going to hurt people. People are going to abuse their rights to free speech, for example, and say some. Not, I honestly don't even think abusing. It's harder to define abuses of free speech rights. It's much harder to define, because I think part of the essential component of free speech is being able to say hateful things. But people are going to try. The Second Amendment is one of the most easiest natural rights to point to where, and not just the Second Amendment, but the right to self-preservation is one of the easiest rights to point to where people are going to can try to abuse that to inflict bodily harm onto others, to inflict their will onto others. The issue is we can try and legislate some things around that, like murder is illegal. But at the end of the day, one of the reasons why we have this government in the first place is to protect our right to self-preservation. And if we all of a sudden say that the government can legislate away our right to self-preservation, then the government isn't doing the job that it was initially created to do. It's directly going against the people that it was instituted to protect. So we can have laws that make acts of abusing your right to self-preservation illegal. We can have I suppose all of these programs to try and educate people on the dangers of I don't know, on the dangers of mass shootings, on the dangers of violent culture, on the dangers of all of this evil that we see in our society. But at the end of the day, legislating away your rights is not going to legislate away that evil. And I think people need to acknowledge that. And at the end of the day, when you start legislating away your rights because you think it's going to solve the issue, you get rid of the reason why we even have this government in the first place. So I am heavily against people who think that putting more restrictions on the Second Amendment and putting more restrictions on gun ownership and putting more restrictions on your fundamental ability to defend yourself from people who would go out of their way to suppress your natural rights, whether it be an institution in government or an individual themselves. I'm against that very prospect. And I think not enough people understand what it truly means to implement stronger gun control in certain areas. And I think that's why they're for it. I genuinely do think I think there's areas where yes, we can discuss gun control, but I think there are certain areas where it's just really a lot of misunderstanding is coming to the fore, and the right isn't, like I said before, the right isn't doing a good enough job at educating people.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's an issue of not just the Second Amendment, not just guns, but it's an issue of limiting rights. And what I've noticed, anyways, a lot of times, you see these activist groups, like these civil rights activist groups, especially like the ACLU and others. They take no particular stance on the Second Amendment. They're very vocal about every other right enumerated in the Bill of Rights, except for the right to bear arms. And there's just so many people out there that they say they're for civil rights and they say they're for individual rights, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, they don't think that the Second Amendment is a good idea. And it's just it's something that is deeply concerning to me, because we've had people that have literally fought and died for the right to bear arms, and that's not an exaggeration. And people are just willing to give willingly give that right away, and it's disconcerting to the history of the United States and how long we've had this, and the great American experiment of having or allowing citizens to have the ability to defend themselves with firearms. It's just it's 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 something that I'm deeply concerned about.
And honestly, with that being said, I think we've reached time with the podcast today. So, Taylor, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything or are there any projects that you'd want people to know about, or is there any way people can hear more from you if they liked you on the podcast today?
Yeah, definitely. Feel free to give me a follow on Twitter. And we're actually me and along with a lot of others are actually doing a lot for the campus carry movement, not only in West Virginia, but also across the nation. And it's something that has been really going across the nation, in the past few years. I think since roughly in the past 10 to 15 years, there's been 12 states to pass policy that allow some type of concealed carry on college campuses. So that's one of the big things that I've been doing so far, or here lately, anyways, in West Virginia, and helping others across the nation to start their own movement. So yeah.
Well, Taylor, thank you so much for coming on again, man.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And to everyone who tuned in today, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back on Friday with an interview from Cabot Phillips, so make sure to tune in for that. I'm really excited for it. And until then, have a good one.